Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining me today for episode 831 of the People Behind the Science podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and I am delighted to have you here for today's episode featuring our guest, Dr. Lewis Jacobs. If you want to learn more about our show, check out past episodes, find our recommended book list, and more, visit us at peoplebehindthescience.com. Now, listeners, Lewis has some wonderful stories to share with all of us today. So get ready to meet another one of our phenomenal people behind the science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to People Behind the Science. Today, I am thrilled to be speaking with our guest scientist, Dr. Lewis L. Jacobs. So, Lewis, welcome to the show today. How are you?
Very good. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we are looking forward to learning more about you and the wonderful work that you do. But before we get into those details, let me just take a moment or two to tell our listeners a little bit more about where you are today and how you got there. So listeners, Lewis is Emeritus Professor in the Roy M. Huffington Department of Earth Sciences and President of the Institute for the Study of Earth and Man, or ISEM, at Southern Methodist University, also known as SMU. He received his bachelor's degree from the University of Southwestern Louisiana, now known as the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and he received his master's and PhD degrees in vertebrate paleontology and evolution from the University of Arizona. Now, after completing his training, Lewis worked as a research paleontologist at the Museum of Northern Arizona, a geologist for the U.S. Geological Survey, a lecturer and a research associate at the University of Arizona, head of the Division of Paleontology at the National Museums of Kenya, and he joined the faculty there at SMU in 1983. During his time at SMU, Lewis has held leadership positions at the Dallas Museum of Natural History, as well as the Schuler Museum of Paleontology at SMU, where he ultimately served as director for 13 years. Lewis has won numerous awards and honors for his scholarship, his service, and the books he's written, including the University Scholar Teacher of the Year Award from SMU, the Joseph T. Gregory Award for Service to the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, the Texas Earth Science Teachers Association Lifetime Membership and Friends of TESTA, or TESTA Award, and many others. And in addition, Lewis is a past fellow of the Explorers Club, past president of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, and he has 10 fossil species that have been named after him. And today, Lewis, we're excited to get to know more about you scientifically, but also more about you as a person. So can you share, what do you like to do when you're not busy doing science?
Well, my eyes always see science, but I like a lot of things. I like to be with my grandkids. I like to drive down roads and look at rocks. I like orchids. I like bookbinding. A lot of different kinds of things, but mainly it's looking and seeing and just enjoying things.
Oh, I love it. So what are your favorite activities with the grandkids these days? Are they getting interested in rocks and geology and paleontology?
They are interested in everything. They do like rocks and fossils. Mm-hmm. They also like astronauts. I have 2 granddaughters, 3 and 5, and they're interested in everything. And that's the way everybody starts out. And many people stay that way forever.
Definitely. And we've hinted a little bit perhaps at your scientific side here. We mentioned rocks, fossils. Let's talk about what you do at work. So how do you describe what you do, Lewis, to someone who's not in your particular field or is perhaps outside of science altogether?
I am a vertebrate paleontologist. That means I study the fossils of backbone animals, any evidence of their past life, and basically try to understand their evolution, how it fits together with the earth, with the environment, and how it presents a holistic picture of the world that we live in. I don't really try to describe what I do to someone that's not in science. Mainly when I'm talking to people that aren't in science, we talk and I listen, and they're almost always automatically interested in fossil vertebrates because who doesn't like fossils? So it's really pretty easy, but I don't force it.
I like that. I think most of us have had that phase at some point in our life where we were just fascinated by dinosaurs. I know I did myself as well. So I can imagine it's easy to get people excited about the work that you do, but it's difficult work. So I think it can be helpful to have little motivational quotes or sayings or things to just keep you going when times are tough. So Lewis, do you have a favorite quote or a saying, whether it's about science specifically or life in general, that you really like?
My favorite quote is that the life lesson of paleontology is that almost nothing is so broken that it can't be fixed. Because fossils are very old and they're very brittle and they're always broken, but they can always be put back together. And it doesn't matter whether it's the earth that breaks them or whether it's people break them by mistake or in preparing them out of the rock. They're almost never so broken you can't fix them. So I think that's a real life lesson.
Absolutely. I love this quote. And I'd love to talk about not only this idea of fixing things that are broken and being able to fix them, but maybe some of the people who inspired you or helped you learn these important lessons along your journey. So do you have mentors or role models or just these historical figures that you've looked up to, Lewis, that you can tell us about?
When I was looking to go to graduate school, I either wanted to go into paleontology or into deep marine invertebrates. And I ended going to the University of Arizona for vertebrate paleontology. And one of the great deans of the new synthesis of evolution was George Gaylord Simpson. He was a very famous paleontologist, mainly studied mammals, but also he wrote volumes on evolutionary theory. He was truly a great scholar. So George Gaylord Simpson is one. And it was just great to have him serve on my committee. It was really very inspirational. Another one is Edwin Harris Colbert. Ned Colbert, I was with him when I was at Museum in Northern Arizona. Both of those gentlemen, George Gaylord Simpson and Edwin Harris Colbert, had retired from being curators at the American Museum of Natural History. Colbert was the last one to redo the dinosaur hall in the American Museum before the great explosion of dinosaur knowledge where everything's been rewritten. Anyway, he was very helpful to me. Both of them and their wives were at Bonnie and my wedding. I'm telling you that because Ned Colbert, for a wedding present, gave us a copy of Sir Richard Owen's book, which was his plan for the British Museum of Natural History, signed by one of the directors of the British Museum, then signed by one of the presidents of the American Museum of Natural History, then signed by a vertebrate paleontologist there, then signed by Colbert to me. So it's got the whole lineage of that book.
Oh, that's so cool.
His wife was Margaret Matthew Colbert, who designed the logo of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology. She was an artist at the American Museum and the daughter of a great paleontologist named William Diller Matthew. And William Diller Matthew went on one of Roy Chapman Andrews' New Conquest of Central Asia trips, and she gave us for our wedding a nice tile that he had brought back from Asia. And I have to say that my major professor, Ev Lindsay at the University of Arizona, he was just a great mentor. We always used to not really poke fun, but all the graduate students recognized that he really didn't have the greatest of social skills, but he had such a big heart and was so helpful. And the last one that I'll mention is David Pilbeam, who's a paleoanthropologist at Harvard, now retired. And for 50 years, he led expeditions and studies of the Sewalik rocks, rocks that were deposited and entombed zillions of fossils as the Himalaya were uplifted and they eroded and buried the fossils. So it gives just a huge record of Asian fossils and environments. But there's so many more. Everybody you meet influences you somehow.
Definitely. Well, Lewis, it sounds like you've had some wonderful mentors and friends in the field there over the course of your career. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about your career. I think many of us as children, as I alluded to earlier, get excited about fossils and dinosaurs and just understanding the history of the world. Can you take us back to maybe your first memories of you starting to have these ideas and this excitement about science?
As a kid, I always wanted to be outside, of course, and always interested in nature and science and all of that. I think that was probably instilled by my parents. They were big education people. And we traveled a lot because my father was in the military and we moved all over. So we saw a lot of different things. But the first vertebrate fossil I really had anything to do with was when I was in undergraduate school at what was then called the University of Southwestern Louisiana. Now it's called the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. And that was in the Ice Age fossils in the surficial rocks of Louisiana. Then I went to graduate school at University of Arizona, and I was very fortunate to be able to take part in field work that was actually more senior graduate students' work. So we collected fossils, of course, in Arizona. Also, there was a big project on Ice Age fossils in Missouri at a place called Bonnie Springs, where there were lots of mastodons and giant ground sloth and a few other things, giant beaver, in these Ice Age springs. And also, as a beginning graduate student, I worked in Yapoma, Mexico for another colleague's senior graduate students, helping him collect fossils for his thesis, and then up in Wyoming, and in my own project, which was in the San Pedro Valley of Arizona. So towards the end, when I was getting a PhD thesis in Arizona, there were two possibilities because there was a big project that my professor was running in the San Juan Basin of New Mexico, and the idea there was to collect samples of rocks to figure out their paleomagnetic orientation. That is, if you chill them down real cold, the magnetic particles in there would show you the direction of the Earth's magnetic field at the time, and that changes through time, so you can use it as a tool for starting to figure out the ages of rocks. So it was very interesting, and we were collecting lots of fossils from before the KPG boundary when the asteroid hit and after. So we learned a lot there, but I didn't end up doing my PhD thesis there. I ended up doing it the same kind of thing, looking at the magnetic properties of the rocks and the fossils that were contained in each zone. And I did my PhD in Pakistan as part of the project that David Pilbeam ran, which went on for 50 years, and it just published a big volume that summarized everything. My role in that was to sieve, to screen for small mammals. And what I'm talking about, believe it or not, are sieving sediments to find individual mouse teeth.
Really?
Now, you talk about trying to find needle in a haystack. I know. But it turns out you can, and it turns out they're very informative. They're not as complete as other kinds of fossils, but you can identify them. And at that time, small mammals were so poorly known, it was a big bonanza. It was telling a lot. And if you think about why these small animals like mice might be important, is because, just think about it, think about how many different species of mice there are in the world. Who knows how many? Mice, or rodents like that, had their origin at about the same time horses did. Horses, throughout their entire history, have never been as diverse as mice have been. Mice have been 1,000 times more diverse. So that relationship tells you that mice evolved very quickly so they can divide up the geologic timescale into smaller portions so you can tell time more precisely. So that's what I was doing.
Well, that is fascinating. I could just envision you maybe sitting out there in the hot sun with your little sieve looking for these mouse teeth. What was it like for you, these kind of early fieldwork experiences? I mean, you were able to go to a lot of different countries and kind of get your feet wet, if you will, doing a lot of different kinds of projects. Was that intimidating for you, or did you just sort of come into it naturally?
Well, looking back on it, you just wonder how you did it, but it was just what to do. That's how it was. But basically, The sieving involves collecting volumes of sedimentary rock that have the characteristics that might preserve fossils, and then hauling it to a stream and putting it through sieves. And then that dries, and you take it back to a microscope and you look through there. And I can remember it was wintertime and it was pretty cold in Pakistan. And the kind of light we had at night to pick by were pressure lamps that kind of had flames coming out the top, and trying to get so close so you could see well. It used to set my hair on fire.
Oh, my goodness.
But found a lot of things. As a matter of fact, one of the things that was found was sort of the basal form, what we used to call ancestors back in those days, of the laboratory mouse and the laboratory rat. And because I had the earliest one and I knew how old it was, that became a calibration point for calibrating trees of molecular evolution, to calibrate how fast the molecules evolve, DNA and the like.
Well, I think that is remarkable, Louis. And I think as you're completing your PhD, there's a difficult decision to make of what to do next. And I think this is something that a lot of people in academia today even face as well. So can you talk a little bit about your career path after you finished your PhD in that time period before you joined the faculty there at SMU?
Well, I was working on stuff in Pakistan. I was the small mammal guy in the Pakistan project. But the Pakistan project wasn't there for rats. It was there for human evolution, because that was the home of Ramapithecus and Sevopithecus, which at the time were thought to be ancestors of humans. And human evolution is a driver of evolutionary studies, as it should be. But it also needs all these ancillary components. So I met all of these people that were big shots in human evolution, and they were tied to East Africa because that's where most of the fossils are from. And it just so happens that David Pilbeam was friends with Richard Leakey, who is the director of the National Museum of Natural History in Nairobi, Kenya. And so was Andrew Hill, who was a British colleague. David's British too, or was. But Andrew Hill also knew Richard. And both of those guys, my friends, when Richard told them he was looking for somebody to head the Department of Paleontology at the National Museum of Kenya, they both recommended me. And I was finishing a field season in Pakistan, and my job where I was at the Museum of Northern Arizona was winding down. So I decided to travel through Africa on the way back. And when I did, they had given me letters to meet Richard Leakey. And when I went into his office, it was a job interview. So then I was hired as head of paleontology at the National Museum of Kenya. And my wife, Bonnie, is a very noted paleobotanist. She was just starting out too, and she came over there. And that's how she got her start in Africa, and it's how I got my start in Africa.
I think that's absolutely amazing. Just walking into this meeting thinking you're just having a delightful conversation with a notable figure in the field, just to find out it's a job interview.
I know it. I can't believe he hired me. I would have been so much more better dressed.
Well, I think that is amazing. So then can you tell us what drew you to SMU back in 1983? You've been at the school for a number of years. You've been doing amazing work there, but what really prompted that transition to academia?
We knew we weren't going to stay in Kenya forever, and expatriates in Kenya worked on 2-year work permits. So mine was running out, and Richard said that he would renew it for another 2 years. And I said, okay, but I'm going to start looking for a job in the States. And there were 2 jobs in vertebrate paleontology that opened that year, and I got offered both of them, and SMU was the better choice.
Well, that's amazing. So you've been at SMU, as we mentioned, since that time. You've held some different leadership positions. You've been able to work at the Dallas Museum of Natural History as well as the Schuler Museum of Paleontology there at SMU. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of these key formative moments over the past couple decades of your career?
Life just happens. I was the interim director of the Dallas Museum of Natural History. That's evolved into the Perot Museum now. But when I was doing that, it was a completely different set of things to think about. I mean, I've always been close to museums, and specimens, but being the head of paleontology at National Museum in Kenya is different from running an entire museum. So it was a different set of skills and people things. But the university is where I really needed to be because you learn so much from the students that you teach. They are so dedicated and brilliant. It's best to stay out of their way, but you learn a lot from them. And that's really a very exciting thing.
Absolutely. And I know you've been able to work on some really cool projects over the years and very recently have even had some exciting discoveries. So let's talk about your research. Is there a particular project, Louis, that you're working on right now or that you've completed recently that you'd like to tell us about in a little bit more detail?
I'm going to start out with this. Back in the 60s, there was a Harvard expedition to northern Kenya. And there was a fossil found that when it was identified, it was said to be a fossil beaked whale, Ziphiidae. These are the deepest diving mammals living today. But this was a 17 million year old fossil found 600 kilometers inland in West Turkana, Kenya, and a couple of thousand feet in elevation. So since whales don't get above sea level, this was an anomaly. And the Harvard collection was sent back to the National Museum in Nairobi. But when I went there with my job, I looked for it. The first thing I did was look for it, and it wasn't there. So it had been studied and identified as a Ziphiid by Jim Mead, who's a very famous beaked whale expert at the Smithsonian Institution, just a wonderful person. And I talked to him about it, and he said, no, I don't have it. And Kay Berensmeyer at the Smithsonian, she was on the expedition, and she said, no, don't know what happened to it. And I asked the people at Harvard, and I kept asking them every time I'd be going back after I came back to the U.S., and then I'd return to Kenya to do something, and I'd always try and find it. So about 30 years after it had been found, I made one last attempt. I called Larry Flynn at Harvard, and he put me in touch with a new collections manager who happened to be from Weatherford, Texas, which is famous for two things. The person that played Peter Pan on Broadway, she's from there. And also the dinosaur Tenontosaurus dawsi is from there. And this new collections manager knew the Dawses, who we named that dinosaur for. And she said, there's one place I can look for this whale that I haven't checked yet. And she went into Stephen Jay Gould's old office, which was being used at the time for oversized storage, and she found that skull.
Oh, my goodness.
So I flew to Boston, Cambridge, and got the skull, took it and had it CT scanned, and then I returned it to the National Museum of Kenya. Now, why it's important is it's very hard to figure out past elevation of land relative to sea level. But if you have a whale, you know it can't be above sea level at that time, 17 million years ago. And then we paired up with a colleague from Germany that was working on the tilt of lava flows that could be dated in East Africa. And we could figure out the rate of uplift and how that related to the formation of the East African Rift, which contains most of the fossils related to human evolution. So it turned out to be a really terrific story and just one of the strangest ones in paleontology that I know of.
Oh, I think that is remarkable. And did students help you with this particular project?
Yes. As a matter of fact, one of the students that helped us was an undergraduate named Andy Lynn, and he was going to medical school. And he interviewed at Harvard, and he interviewed at several other ones, and he came back and he said, you know, in the interview, the most interesting thing for them was that I was looking at whales. So it set him apart.
Oh, that's amazing.
So that was pretty good.
And Louis, I understand that you had a cool project in Malawi as well that we'd love to hear about.
Yes. We worked in Malawi for several years, and we wanted to get a Malawi student. So our colleagues at the Department of Antiquities, we spoke to them. And we said we wanted a student that was good in all sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics. And they found one, and we took her out in the field with us for 2 years. And she did her master's and her PhD and she named a new dinosaur from Malawi and studied the osteology of another one. And when she went back to Malawi, Malawi may not need everyone to be a vertebrate paleontologist, but they need somebody to be. And she was it. And her critical skills were such that she was just propelled up the ladder. And she is now the Secretary of National Unity for the Republic of Malawi. I'm very proud of her.
Definitely. And I think, Louis, being able to celebrate these exciting discoveries and also just the success of your trainees is really meaningful in science. And I think, unfortunately, those days don't happen every day, right? There's a lot of difficult times and struggle and kind of frustrating moments where it feels like everything's going wrong. So we like to talk about these challenges and struggles and failures because I think these stories don't often see the light of day, and it makes scientists or other students, trainees out there feel like they're alone when they're going through these difficult times. So do you have a story of yours that you can share of a struggle or a failure?
I probably have as many as anybody else does, but I don't dwell on them and I don't remember them that well, to tell you the truth. But it's best when things come up to stay calm about them. Don't get frustrated. Don't take anything out on anybody else and just step through them one step at a time. Lots of things are very immediate and you worry about them, but you overcome them. I got stuck out late in Pakistan one time with a couple of camels and somebody that was with me out there. We had them loaded down with dirt, but it took me so long to fill them. I overstayed my time, and then we had to walk back in the dark. So I had the responsibility of leading this belligerent camel that didn't want to walk along, and that was a little frightening because it wasn't a very stable path to go on. But the herder knew exactly where to go, and we got out okay. But the people back at camp were worried, and you don't want to cause anybody to be worried. Now, there are other kinds of things, like, for instance, when your equipment doesn't work and you can't get it to work, things like that. And that happens all the time if you're trying to get measurements or something. But that's just all part of it.
Absolutely. And I think oftentimes you learn so much from these challenges, these failures, these struggles that you might not have otherwise learned if everything went smoothly.
So I have a former student who's absolutely brilliant. Many of them are. And she uses geochemistry to understand the ecology and evolution of fossils. And she's mainly been doing it with mice using laser ablation, which kind of explodes elements off the enamel, and then you can measure what the composition is. So she did that for things in the Sewellics. She's now employed at the National Museum of Tokyo. And I guess you would call her an experimental paleontologist because she wanted to find out what the effect of nursing mother's milk is on the teeth of mice. Now, this isn't a really limited problem because in lots of mammals, their teeth erupt over time, and that means if the diets change over time, the composition of the teeth that are developing will change over time. So she set up experiments where she could measure the isotopes, the chemistry of the teeth, when they erupt from before the time they're nursing to the time they are nursing to the time they're weaning. And then she worked out the mathematical model of the change through that. And then you can go back to the fossil record and correct for the ages of the individual teeth that you find and use for samples for geochemistry.
I think that's fascinating.
I do too.
Was it challenging? It sounds like it was challenging.
It was very challenging and amazingly frustrating because in a complicated set of experiments or measurements like that, there are just so many unforeseen factors that have to be accommodated as you go along.
Well, I think that is remarkable. And I think these challenges are important to kind of work through, and it's important to stay positive and, like you said, not dwell on these challenges. And we love to talk about the successes, the happy moments in science as well. So, Louis, you've had many successes over the course of your career. Do you have a favorite success story that you'd like to share with us today?
That'd be like choosing among your kids. But you got to like the one that you're working on at the time. One of the things that's going on now, my colleagues and we started working with some academic dentists, experimental geneticists, and developmental biologists They're working on the periodontal ligament, which mammals have. But it turns out that the periodontal ligament, which is a flexible thing that holds your teeth in the sockets, that evolves several times in both reptiles and in mammals. And why should that be? They have separate origins on this. So what it boils down to is that there's a genetic control that is in effect dormant when the periodontal ligament is not developed, but very active when it is. And since that happens in both reptiles and mammals, and since the periodontal ligament and the anatomy of how it makes teeth fit in sockets is recognizable in both reptiles and mammals, then you can start sorting out the genetics and development and apply it to fossils, because you can see the ones that did have periodontal ligaments and their train of evolution through time. So that is a very exciting thing for me, and that's what we're involved in right now. The other thing is, we started working in the country of Angola. Angola is in Southwest Africa on the coast, and it's right there where South America and Africa look like they fit together like puzzle pieces, because they did fit together. And that intrigues everyone, just like fossils do. So what happens when you put an ocean where there wasn't one before? Well, first of all, the animals that lived on land are prevented from traveling across the whole expanse because there's a sea barrier. But the sea barrier opens up and marine reptiles can start swimming across the hemispheres. So we found great amounts of fossils in Angola, and we related that to fossils in North America and elsewhere. We put together an exhibit in the Smithsonian that had over 15 million visits, and there's now a traveling exhibit that will travel the U.S. for 3 years. But the most important thing is, when we started working there, Angola had been at war for 40 years, and the wars had just stopped. So there was no national memory of anything about fossils, anything about natural history, anything about anything. So the fossils all would go back to Angola. So we had to take steps to figure out how Angolans can take care of them and why would they want to. And we thought that, well, everybody around the world loves fossils, and the Angolans are not going to be any different. So we have to let them know about these. Well, how do you do that? We thought if we can get an exhibit for people from other countries to look at Angolan fossils, the people in Angola will say, those are our fossils and we like them. So that's why we got the exhibit in the Smithsonian. And now one of the Angolan students that joined us in that project was named the director of the Angolan National Museum of Natural History.
Well, I think that is so cool. Listeners, if you're interested in seeing the exhibit, it is called Sea Monsters Unearthed, Life in Angola's Ancient Seas. And Louis, I think these are phenomenal successes and really exciting projects. And I think when you're working on these things, you're often reading a lot of the science, the literature, but we also encourage our listeners to take a break and read for fun as well, maybe read outside of their field. So do you have a book recommendation, whether it's related to science or not, that you want to share with us today that we can add to our own reading lists?
There was a volunteer at the Dallas Museum of Natural History named Lloyd Hill. And in his younger days, he had spent some time in Brazil. And Lloyd, he was very soft-spoken and slow-spoken, just a very good person. And he wrote a book called The Village of Bom Jesus. Bom Jesus was the name of a cat. And this is a book that's about tales of the Brazilian jungle through the eyes of this cat. And it's beautifully written. It's just a great book. It's by Lloyd Hill. That's the one that I would recommend. It's a fun book to read. It's deep. It's a good read. I also go for books. Alan Patton's book, the South African writer, Cry the Beloved Country, Too Late the Fell Rope, and various books, but those are very good books too. And I like the natural history books by Archie Carr, who was a sea turtle expert at the University of Florida. Those are the ones that I would recommend.
Well, fantastic recommendations, Louis. We appreciate you sharing some of your favorite books, and I will put them on our website for our listeners to find. And we've talked throughout our conversation about just some of these amazing opportunities that you've had to travel the world because of your science, all these different fieldwork places you've gone and your academic training as well. So can you share what are some of your favorite places that you've gone for science?
I like all of them. One that I haven't mentioned yet was another one of my very good students named Young-Nam Lee from Korea. He set up a 5-year project in Mongolia. So for those 5 years, I spent the field seasons with him in Mongolia and in the Gobi Desert. That was great, meeting the Mongolians. It's the people that make the places. And spending time in Korea with my former student there was great. My Japanese students were just wonderful. One of them, Yoshi Kobayashi, who now is a very famous dinosaur paleontologist in Japan. He's at the museum at Hokkaido University. I spent a few months there, and every country is different. Every culture is different. Everyone deserves to be known. Everyone deserves a chance to delve into different cultures and to appreciate what others do.
Oh, absolutely. And you mentioned specifically this trip to Mongolia. Can you share what it was like and maybe how it was different from some of the other places you've been?
That is a vast desert. It's hot, it's dusty, it's sandy, full of fossils. And of course, that goes way back to Roy Chapman Andrews and the new conquest of Central Asia, the first dinosaur eggs, a velociraptor, all of those things, protoceratops. So just being there is a lesson in itself. But I suppose what I should really say is that Mongolia, people have been going there a long time. People have been going to Wyoming, Montana, Texas, China for a long time looking for fossils. The people that live there are looking for fossils, but the science moves forward and evolves. I've also talked about some of the techniques that are applied now that you couldn't do when I started out. And there are things that are being done now by graduate students that I never heard of before. So not any field of science is static, and certainly not paleontology. And all of them, just like the puzzle pieces of Africa and South America. Every single place is a part of the puzzle. And if you want the whole story, you got to have all the puzzle pieces. That's not just the geography of it. It's the timing of it. And it's the tools that you have to understand the questions that you're asking of it. So everything has to fit together, and it all has to make sense, whether you're looking at the present day or you're looking in deep time.
Oh, definitely. And I think to put this big puzzle together, you need to work with collaborators and people around the world. And you've mentioned some of these people during our conversation, but I think oftentimes scientists have a particular reputation. We'll say in the media, there's certain ways that they're often portrayed, whether it's in the lab or whether it's paleontologists out in the field. And I think oftentimes these stereotypes aren't true. I think there are so many amazing, creative, funny, quirky people in science, and that's not necessarily the reputation that scientists have on a broader scale. So when you look back on your career, do you have examples of maybe some of these quirky traditions or funny science memories or just fond experiences that you shared with colleagues that maybe go against some of the stereotypes that people may still have?
Well, people come in all shapes and sizes, so some are more open than others are. But those that want to know things are willing to share and be open. And I think the funniest thing is, first of all, when you're exhausted and you're around camp and there's just such a fondness and camaraderie, it's just great. This just came into my mind. But one time in Antarctica, I was sleeping on a little cot there in the tent, and a baby elephant seal came up and laid against my feet.
Oh, my goodness.
And we talked about some of the things you have to put up with. We got our camp blown away there one time and had to go sit in an ice cave for a little while. But you can laugh about stuff as soon as the trouble's gone.
Right.
And that's what happens, whether you're exhausted or whether you've had to fix a problem or whether you were scared. When it's all over, everybody's there, everybody's happy, and everybody's laughing.
Definitely. I think some of these struggles that you work through, particularly in fieldwork, can really bring people together, and you share that perhaps traumatic experience in some cases and can laugh about it later.
Yeah. When you're working in the lab, too, A lot of energy goes into your brain to really concentrate for really long hours about these questions you're trying to answer. So when the time comes for it to be over and to unwind, everyone unwinds. And it's just such a pleasure. There's a shared focus. And that shared focus and the pleasure of coming to some end, even if it's just a step along the way, it just fosters friendship, camaraderie, and graciousness. That's just a very worthwhile part of the human experience.
Oh, absolutely. I think the scientific community that you form and this network of people that you work with over the years is something that many people outside of science may not appreciate. It's a huge part of life of a scientist. And we talked about some of the big problems and questions that you're working to answer with the work that you do. But I know in every field, there are things that limit what you can do, whether it's funding, staff, technology, time, or just the feasibility of the projects that you wish you could do. So if we took away the things that normally hold you back, Louis, what is the one research question you would most want to answer?
Science, whether it's paleontology or anything else, advances when you can see in more detail and measure with more precision. And that makes it, in a way, kind of iterative. So the problems of evolution, if you can look at a problem of development and morphological evolution at the same time with more precision and relate things to each other by seeing more detail, that's where breakthroughs come from. So it's seeing in finer and finer detail and measuring with more and more precision, whether it's the amounts of isotopes or anything else. It's being able to go smaller or bigger, but just enlarging the numerical dimensions of what you're trying to observe.
Oh, I love that. And I think this challenge applies, like you said, to all scientific fields and is something that we're all sort of slowly chipping away at working towards. It's a wonderful way to dedicate those unlimited dream resources we mentioned today. And we appreciate you sharing a lot of your experiences and your stories with us. And I think another part of being a scientist is, like we said earlier, working with these mentors and getting advice that can help you get through these different phases of your career. So is there one piece of advice, Louis, that somebody gave you at some point that really helped you that you can share with our listeners today?
As far as sharing knowledge or encouraging people, I'll say this. I had a graduate student that came here, never heard of him before as far as I knew, but he came to study with me. And after a year or two, he said, I wrote you when I was a little kid. And I said, oh, yeah? Did I answer? He said, yes, that's why I came here.
That's amazing.
I'm going to say this specifically about vertebrate paleontologists. There is a responsibility to the public and the people that are not scientists to relate. So if you get that email from some inquiring mind, it's best to answer it.
I love that story and I love that message. And I think you're absolutely right. You never know where these connections may lead. And I think connecting with the community, not just the scientific community, is tremendously important and valuable. Is there any other additional piece of advice or perhaps a last note of inspiration, Louis, that you would like to leave us all with at the end of our conversation today?
I don't know that I can do that, but I can say this. I don't believe I've ever talked to anybody this much about these things. So I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, it has been a pleasure to hear more about you, your work, and what you're working on these days. And if our listeners want some more details about all these fantastic things that you're doing, what is the best way for them to learn more?
You can contact me through SMU. You can go to the website, the Department of Earth Sciences at SMU. But probably the best way, since I said that paleontologists have a responsibility and should respond, probably the best way is to email me, jacobs@smu.edu.
Perfect. Well, listeners, definitely take some time to learn more about Louis and the amazing work that he and his team have been doing over the years. And Louis, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And listeners, always wonderful to have you here with us. We hope you'll join us again for another episode of People Behind the Science.